Hello, and thanks for joining me again today on another Sandia Mountain Natural History Center quick trip. Today, we are out in the middle of nowhere in the Sandia Mountains near Placitas, New Mexico. And the reason I say we're in the middle of nowhere is because we're doing a little bushwhacking. Sometimes the best way to see new things and to experience nature is to actually get off the trail. So we've climbed to the top of a pretty steep hill, and we have a mesa out here, and we're just going to do some exploring and looking around. But we are probably a mile or more from the nearest road or trail, just in the total backcountry. And that's a great way to find interesting things and see interesting things. But be careful. Make sure that people know where you're going. Make sure that you have good navigation skills. And be prepared for anything, because you are off of a trail. It will be much harder to find you if something goes wrong. Let's go see what we can find. So here we have some deer scat. Well, one of the interesting things about this pile of deer scat is on top of it we have this and this, which are both coyote scat. So what a coyote will do is will mark its territory, and I'm not sure why they would do this to a deer, but they will basically poop on other animals' poop in order to mark their territory. That donut-looking feature in this piece of limestone is a crinoid. Crinoids were a creature that lived in the ocean about 300 million years ago. And finding marine fossils like this is one of our best pieces of evidence that New Mexico at one time was covered in a shallow sea. So I've come across this about 15-foot wall of limestone at the top of my hike, or at the top of the hill I'm climbing. And it looks like a very easy hill to, or cliff to climb, if I wasn't alone. I don't want to take that kind of risk when I'm alone. But luckily, I found a little break, and it looks like I'll be able to get closer to the top going up this little cleft in the cliff. This cactus has been eaten by animals, either deer, rabbits, even coyotes, bears. A lot of things will eat this. And a few years ago, we used to wonder how they did it, how they dealt with the spines. And then we were doing some bear research where we had a bear sedated while we collared it. We looked inside of its lips, and its whole mouth was covered in cactus spines. So I guess they just deal with it. So I made it to the top of my hill, and I picked a pretty incredible spot to stop and have lunch. Off in the distance there, you see the Ortiz Mountains. They were formed by volcanoes about 30 million years ago. If we pan over just a little bit, I hope you can see that on the camera off in the distance, the white-capped peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, formed by uplift about 65 million years ago. As a little bonus, we have more white-capped peaks in the distance. Those are the Jemez Mountains, also volcanic mountains. And then we actually can pan around a little bit more. They might not look as spectacular, but the backside of the Sandias, which are some of the most rare mountains in the world, formed in what we call a rift valley, where one part of the earth actually subsides and another part rises up. It's called a rift. And in this case, the Sandias were formed along the Rio Grande Rift. So, found a little bit of moss here. And even though we've had snow lately, it looks a little brown and kind of a little bit dormant. But let's do a little science trick and see what happens. I'm gonna pour some water on it, wait a couple minutes and see what happens. So the water's almost dried up, but you can see, hopefully, that this has turned a brighter shade of green. So when this moss is not wet, it goes dormant, and that's how it can survive in our hot, dry environment here in New Mexico. This blob of sap is a good indicator that the tree is dying from bark beetles. The tree is fighting back, trying to fill the holes that the bark beetles make. This sap is used in many places as chewing gum, called trementina. It's also a real good fire starter. It can be made into a way to get out splinters. If you rub that on your skin and then you pull out the splinter. So sticky sap has a lot of different uses in the backcountry. All these grooves in the tree that you can see are left by bark beetles. And if you get to be a good enough bark beetle expert, you could actually determine the type of bark beetle by the shape of the engravings that they leave in the tree. So here's something we don't really see that often in New Mexico. A good old rotting log. And in this case, we can see how this crumbles up. That is an example of what we call white rot. But on this same tree, we have something pretty interesting. We see these segments here. This is brown rot. And if we break this off, one of the interesting things is we get these pretty sharp edges. Won't camera focus for me? Those sharp edges, these lines are because the plant is decomposing. The insides of the plant are decomposing and the cell walls are remaining intact. So we get these segmented little pieces that almost look like it was cut. That's brown rot. Well, I'm not the first one here. Someone was here back when flip-top cans were a thing. That's pretty long ago. So we've got a cool find here. This is a bone. And if we flip it over, we see that socket. Tells us it's a hip or a shoulder joint. It's tough to tell. Some of the interesting things is how fractured it is along here. Looks like it was chewed by an animal. So that may indicate that instead of just dying, it may have actually been a prey animal and killed. But it's a cool little find.